Good evening. Welcome to Chasing the Facts. I'm Sam Chase, your host, and this is another interview in our series of interviewing political candidates for the town's spring election, which will be on April 4th. What's that, 3 weeks?
Just about.
3 weeks. And with us this evening is John Sousa, Jr. I just learned that
right.
tonight. John Sousa, Jr., who is a candidate for one of the two open seats for Planning Board. So, John, welcome aboard. Glad to have you on the show.
Thank you. Great to be here, Sam.
And what we usually do is, especially for new people who haven't been on the show before, we ask the guests to just give us a little bit of a biographical snapshot, and then we'll get into the discussion. So I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you. Well, for those that don't know me, I'm a lifelong Chelmsford resident. Lived here proud to say I've lived here for 57 years, so you can guess my age. I'm a graduate of Chelmsford High School, member of the class of '84. I was honored last fall to be inducted into the Chelmsford High School Hall of Fame back in October. And for my educational background, I earned my bachelor's from the University of Mass at Lowell. And then later in life, I returned, further my education, I earned an MBA from Suffolk University. For my professional experience, I've been employed, as many people know, with the town of Chelmsford. I've served as finance director now. It's been about 15 years.
It's been that long?
Believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
Nearly 15. And then prior to that, I served as financial coordinator for the Chelmsford schools, and I have extensive experience in public works, in the public works area. So all told, just under about 30 years of municipal management experience. And then for elected offices, I've served as a town meeting representative in the past for many years. I was first elected in 1989 as a town meeting rep, if you can believe it, at age 23. That was the first year the charter created the town representative town meeting. I currently serve as a member of the Cemetery Commission.
Mm-hmm. And that's an elected position?
That's an elected position as well.
So if should you be elected to this position, would you be resigning that position?
Yes, because under the charter, a citizen can hold just one elected office. So just to explain to residents, if I'm successful in early April running for Planning Board, I will resign from the Cemetery Commission.
You can hold multiple appointed positions, but only one elected position.
That's correct.
That's very important, and that would be too much heavy lifting anyway.
Yes.
So, well, that's. I think you've got an excellent background for elected public service. Certainly, you know the town very well, obviously, and you've served in a number of areas. Actually, I remember when you got the finance position. I think I was on the select board at the time.
Yes.
And I remember the appointment process. So it just doesn't seem that it's...
Time goes by.
Time goes by very quickly. So I guess, the question I would ask anybody, especially a newcomer to elected politics in Chelmsford, is why are you running, and why are you running at this time?
Sam, to sum it up really, I'm running to protect Chelmsford's neighborhoods. And I think it's time for a more common sense approach and a new voice. A few things sort of piqued my interest. One being the whole River Neck Road project, and there have been other things. But so I thought about it, discussed it with my wife, and I thought the time was right. And that's really my reasons for entering this race. So
the Planning Board is two things, and I'll just give you my perspective on it. Planning Board is two things. They are as the name suggests, a planning board, okay, that addresses or should address zoning issues prospectively, and then they're also a regulatory board in terms of, reviewing specific projects that are before the board and making sure that, everything is within compliance and so on and so forth. So we've just gone through a situation, and this doesn't happen too often, where a major project was proposed, you alluded to it just now, the River Neck project, and this process went on for about a year and a half. Is that right? Back and forth.
I'd say nearly 18 months.
Okay, about 18 months, and then the developer withdrew the project without prejudice, which means he can bring it back. at a later time in essentially the same form, although I don't think that would be a very smart thing for him to do under the circumstances, or altered in some way. You said that that project kind of piqued your interest. So in what way? Maybe you could expand on that a
Yeah,
little bit.
I just think it was the wrong project for the wrong site. Certainly, you know, there were 2 vacant buildings there, and it was the former home of Mercury Computer Systems, a
they were there
defense
for-
contractor.
They were there for many years.
Yes, and I never heard of problems with the neighbors complaining about those buildings being there. This was something different, though, where the developer had bought additional properties that were adjoining to the 199 and 201 River Neck Road, and proposing to build a 250,000 square foot distribution center. And I think people sometimes have trouble visualizing that. And there were a couple of citizens that came in last month, if you remember. The Lunas. And
One picture is worth a
their
thousand words.
engineering expertise was very helpful, because when they showed the model that they made of the distribution center in comparison to the residential homes looked like little tiny homes like you'd see in a Monopoly game, and they would be dwarfed by this distribution center. So that's, and then the other thing that compounded the project was a lot of the residents had issues with the traffic on River Neck Road, and I can tell you as someone that drives on that road every day, it would not have been enhanced by all that heavy truck traffic. So then certain individuals came back and said, well, problem solved. We'll take a quiet little fire access road that's gated and we'll turn it into a highway for trucks, totally destroying the neighborhood for the people that live on Monmouth Street and still around River Neck Road. So I just think that in itself was just so shocking to a lot of people, that it really galvanized that neighborhood.
I would even suggest, and I followed the progress pretty carefully, I would even suggest that proposed access road might have been the straw that broke the camel's back. Because if I remember correctly, part of the discussion was, well, there was a commitment made to the residents at the time that that access road was established. Unfortunately, as you know from your service in the town, things don't always get written down and recorded the way they should.
Right.
And apparently that particular thing was not a matter of record anywhere, but people certainly remembered. And the use over the last, 30 years or so would certainly have indicated that that was the intent, because that access road never was used for anything else but that.
No, and I can say as a lifelong East Chelmsford resident, I remember when
I'm sure.
when those buildings were created, and if anyone goes by there, it's a very narrow road.
Yes.
I think you could probably just fit a piece of fire apparatus.
Well, unless you know what you're looking for, you'd miss it
Yeah.
driving by on River Neck, Yeah, I thought that was very, very problematic, and certainly served to further erode the chances of the developer getting his project approved the way it would. So you looked at this thing, 18 months in the offering. It didn't seem to be getting any better with regard to, any concessions that the developer was making, to mitigate certain concerns of the neighbors. And we even had a citizen petition warrant articles, 3 of them, go before town meeting. And I don't think anybody would try to suggest that the River Neck Road issue really wasn't a major driving factor to enacting those zoning changes at town meeting.
No, and that's something that brought this on my radar even more. So last October, I actually spoke out on this at town meeting. You had a citizen, and I'll name him because he did a lot of work on it, Chris LaValle.
No, it's no secret.
Yeah, he did a lot of work putting together a warrant article. But I go back to, it shouldn't have been a citizen that had to do all that heavy lifting. We all know that e-commerce has just exploded with people ordering things from home over the last decade or so, even more so during the pandemic. So everybody with reasonable sense would say, at some point, a developer is going to come to Chelmsford and probably want to propose to build a distribution center. It's just, we're right at a nice area near Route 3 and 495. So and that's one of the reasons, when you asked me to share, what are some things that I would do differently if elected, I would work with other members of the planning board to try to be proactive and not sit back and wait for things to come or wait for a citizen to do this, because then you invite problems. You could have a situation, you don't want to sit back and wait for projects to come, see what happens. If we had been more proactive and had regulations on the size of distribution centers earlier, before Mr. LaValle proposed all that, I think we could have avoided a tough situation for the neighborhood. And then you complicate that in my mind with, after he did all that work, he spoke with members of the planning board. He refined his language, and then I believe it was still voted down, or they did not choose to present it.
I believe you're right. I believe the majority of the board did not endorse the
Did not
endorse the articles as proposed, as presented to town meeting.
And then when you look at the vote, I spoke out on it because it was something near and dear to my heart. So I don't often speak on non-financial articles all the time. Then just seeing that happen, then the vote, I thought the vote would be a lot closer. And it was about 124, 125 to 11. So that showed me, and then the people that spoke after I spoke were overwhelmingly against distribution centers. And so it showed me there was a disconnect between some members of the planning board and the citizens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I think you've characterized that accurately. As you know, I'm on the finance committee, so I was there for the discussion, and we had to consider it. And the FinCom voted unanimously in favor of the first two articles. And then the third article, which addressed specifically the establishment of large fulfillment center type distribution centers, would limit those to 75,000 square feet and then prohibit anything larger than that, which is ultimately what passed town meeting. And the threshold for any zoning change is 2/3, so it's already got a large hurdle.
Yes.
I have to say, I agree with you, I was completely shocked at the margin. I mean, it was well over the 2/3. So to me, the town was speaking at that point. And you bring up a very good point, and I don't want to take away from your time to talk, but I think it's a very important point for residents to understand. In terms of what the planning board's mission is, and you just articulated it, so we know about the regulatory aspect. Developer comes in, here's my project, does it fit the zoning, yes or no? Does it fit almost, maybe? Does it fit the overlay, and maybe it needs a permit or two to make it fit? That's all part of the regulatory process. But what about what you're just talking about, the prospective part of the job? Should we be looking as a town, as a planning board member, should you be looking to make sure that the zoning is well defined for the town for what we anticipate to be coming economically? Example, the town of Burlington, who probably has done the best job of any town in the area. They started 30 years ago with their zoning. They sat down and they said, this is what we want the town to look like. And then they started with their zoning changes, and it was tough. And every single one of those changes was bitterly fought because people don't like change.
Right.
Okay? But what you've got now in Burlington, and I would argue Burlington is still a pretty good residential town. But the way they've done their zoning is they've defined certain areas that are appropriate for commercial and industrial, and they've left the residential alone. So you don't have these intrusions of these large-scale proposals into residential neighborhoods, which is what we had on Riverneck. Burlington didn't do, but it took them 30 years to get there. So I look at their situation and I say, they had a very proactive planning board that was looking into the future. And what do they have today? If you look at their real estate values, 45% of their real estate is in commercial, industrial, and related personal property. Only 55% is on the residence. Wouldn't we love to have something like that in Chelmsford? What would that do to the residential tax-paying bill?
Oh, exactly.
It would bring it way, way down. Now, we would never achieve that in Chelmsford because we're largely a built-out town. So that ship sailed 35 or 40 years ago. But that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the planning board taking that part of its mission or charter, if you will, and doing that part of the job. So
Yeah, and something the board did a while back
Yeah.
that's been very positive is the business amenity overlay district. And so you're basically taking the Route 129 corridor that became dated, and you're changing the zoning to allow restaurants, banks, dry cleaners, things that people would want near their workplace. And we just saw Pressed Cafe opening at 330 Billerica Road.
have you been there?
I have. It's very.
My wife and I went last Sunday night for the first time. We took in a show in Boston, and on the way home, she said, let's do it, and I was very impressed, very impressed.
Yeah, and they seem to have
Yeah.
a good amount of customers. So
Yeah, the menu is very expansive. The food, I thought, was very good. And it's doing, hopefully it'll do exactly what we thought it was going to do, act as sort of a draw maybe for other commercial types of activities that can fill in some of those empty buildings that we have over
Right.
there, because now people actually have a place they can go for lunch, which they didn't have before.
exactly.
And that was the whole idea of that overlay. So, that's something that you would address as a planning board member going forward, looking for those kinds of situations where maybe we can make things a little bit better, for the town as a whole
Yeah.
in terms of its economy. So, yeah, that overlay is a very, very good example. But that was hard fought.
Yes.
There were people who didn't like that idea, especially the idea of a drive-through.
Yeah, and I think where it is,
Yeah.
it's not. It doesn't
It's fine.
impede traffic.
No,
it's
it's fine.
convenient, and I think it. People's, people's desires change over decades. I mean, when a lot of those buildings were built in the 80s and 90s, people may have had different ideas in Chelmsford.
No, exactly. Exactly right. I know in the town of Westford you can't do a drive-through, and probably the only McDonald's in the whole country where you can't drive through.
Sure
get,
it is.
Get a Happy Meal in your car, and I just think it's very strange, And I'm not sure that really helps anything. I know people think, well, it'll cause more traffic if you have the drive-through. I'm not convinced of that. I'm really not. Just based on general observation. But again, it's a matter of opinion, I suppose. So, so now you're elected to the planning board. You've got one of the two open seats, and we've just talked a little bit about this. But is there anything that you have specifically in mind that you would like to take on, perhaps as an initiative effort for the planning board?
If elected, I'd like to work with other members to try to address some of the zoning conflicts that we have in town, whether it be in East Chelmsford, North Chelmsford, and various other sections.
Take a minute and explain
Yeah.
to the viewers what you think a zoning conflict
Yeah.
is.
So a zoning conflict is when you have different types of properties sort of dropped in or surrounded by other. So, for example, the Mercury computer site is zoned commercial industrial, but it's surrounded by residential properties. You have other situations like that in town.
So that could be properly characterized as a zoning conflict. Yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
Now, my impression, again, having been in town meeting for many years, is that the town has created some of those by spot zoning in certain areas. I can think of areas up in the North Chelmsford area where that has happened because a person wanted to change zoning for one and got it done, and that's the kind of thing that bothers me. Zoning to me should be looked at in a more holistic approach. What's not only good just for the immediate neighborhood, but what's good for the town as a whole. So, is that the direction?
Yeah, that's
you
a
would
direction
go
that I
in?
would like to work with other
Yeah.
members. It's certainly not something, one member can do by themselves, but working together with other members, that would be my desire.
Do you see any particular, is there any opportunity for outreach, say, to any of the other boards? And I'm thinking of the select board, I'm thinking of master plan, conservation, anything like that. Would you seek to establish any kind of an ongoing relationship for these types of things?
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea to work in cooperation with any boards that we can, whether it be select board or you mentioned conservation. You don't want to see the planning board just be like a little silo unto itself. I think that working with other boards would definitely enhance what we're trying to do.
Well, that's good, and I think we've, and I had a question on the outline, and which is, what is your position on proactive zoning? So I think you've kind of answered that question. I think we're somewhat limited in Chelmsford because, again, we are largely a built-out town, and the opportunities for new types of development are limited. But I think the opportunities for redevelopment are probably large. And you talked a little bit about the 129 corridor and the efforts. I know when Lisa Maroney came in, I think she's been here, what, 4 years now? Has it been that long? Time flies.
It may even be a little longer than that, but yeah, she's done a lot of great things.
We had almost 1.5 million square feet of vacant commercial space in the town, and I think now it's down to like 400,000, something like that. So, and that during COVID, that's quite an accomplishment, I think. But you know, short of redeveloping and you know, releasing and so forth, do you really see any opportunity for new types of projects to come in? And if you do, what kind of projects would you envision?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a whole committee formed to try to improve the Vinyl Square business area, right in the Vinyl Square area itself. And as you mentioned, you know, people are often resistant to change. A lot of the buildings are traditional. I'm not saying that you want to change all that, but you know, certainly that committee and some of the focus has been to try to spruce up, you know, some of the storefronts and try to fill any vacancies that are there. So that could be another area that, you know, I know there's been initiatives by the committee and others and citizens that in the North Chelmsford neighborhood to do planters, working with the community development department to try to do planters, do all types of things to try to enhance that area.
That would not involve any zoning changes per se, though.
No, not that I'm aware of.
So we have two things I know going on in the center of town. We have, and I'm not as up on them as I probably should be, the situation on Acton Road where they've just taken down the building that was there. It already looks better. I mean, that's just my opinion. Okay, that was not a very very attractive site.
9 Acton Road. If
yeah, 9 Acton Road. That's it. So that's going to be, I believe that's residential.
Yeah, and I mean
25 units or something like that.
Yeah, and I believe the board worked with them over time to try to reduce the height and reduce the scope of that. And I think in some cases,
they came in at some outrageous number of units. I forget what it was, and now it's like 24 or 25 or something.
Yeah, and I think you know, you reach sometimes that commercial building was an older one, it kind of was kind of obsolete. And I think sometimes you reach a point where you do have to redevelop and go to a totally different, change the use slightly.
And that's different because we're not talking about taking open space and putting something on it, cutting trees down. We're talking about knocking down a building that was already there and doing something a little better maybe. Okay.
Yeah. There has been a lot going on in Chelmsford Center. I think it's an exciting time. I mean, many of us remember it's always looking one way, and there were older buildings, some were vacant, like Oddfellows. There's been a lot going on there. I know people had asked about that for numerous years. You have a lot of development going on with the grist mill condo building. I know that was very popular when that opened. Sold out right away. I think
it was completely rented before they were finished construction. Yeah.
Now on the flip side, this goes to what I'm talking about is you know, we have to look at these projects and really scrutinize them. Is when a similar I think it was the same developer wanted to do grist mill 2 on the other side of Chelmsford Center. That was a whole different ball game, and I think that site had all types of issues, and that really galvanized that neighborhood to oppose that project. So.
Well, that was sort of like the river neck in a way because, yes, the immediate neighborhood was disturbed by that. But there were people from other parts of the town. I did not favor that project because, again, you look at the underlying zoning, and if I remember correctly, the base zoning said you could do 4 residential units for that site, 4. The overlay gives you latitude, obviously, and you know, it's a negotiation process between the developer and the planning board and so on and so forth. The developer came in and said, well, we'd like to do 32. You know, and my thought was, you know, it's okay to vary from the zoning. You've got the overlay and so forth, and the planning board has the ability to issue waivers and so on and so forth. But to my way of thinking, that is to make a project that is almost there but not quite fit.
Right.
It's not to completely destroy the underlying zoning.
Right.
You know, 4 to 32 is a big jump. And then, as you mentioned, there were other issues that had to be considered too.
Yeah, and that's something that really bothers me at times. Is there's you know, and my radar will go up if
Yes.
I'm elected to the planning board and I see a project come along and they're seeking like 10 special permits. The special permit process is there for a reason. But if they're seeking numerous special permits, then my radar is going to pick that up and tell me something's wrong here. Someone's trying to force a project onto a site that perhaps really doesn't fit, and they're, you know.
And I think that's a very legitimate thing to say. It really is. I mean, again, you know, you have to be more specific, obviously, because whoever buys the property has their legal rights, okay?
Right.
So they have the legal right to develop that property consistent with the zoning and consistent with whatever the building codes say. But once you get to the point of you've got to make so many exceptions, zoning is an expression of what the community wants the town to look like. So putting a huge building in a residential area, maybe that's probably not what we want, okay? And so my understanding of your candidacy is that that's really why you're running, is to,
Yeah,
is to
I mean,
bring that kind of focus onto the board and its activities.
Yeah, I just felt that throughout the whole Riverneck process, the abutters are often, you know, they really had to make their voice heard. And it's like, when you step back from it and think, if you have people that are in town, they own their homes, they probably bought them when they were younger, they've invested a lot of money in them, they've lived there for years, that's their life. It's not just they're not just making a business decision. This is where they decide to buy their home, raise their family. Shouldn't we listen to those people first, their opinions and what they desire for the town? And they are taxpayers, like all of us that own property in town. Shouldn't we take their opinions with a higher value than somebody that's coming in? And sure, if a business developer wants to come in and create a project and it might enhance value, but we also have to look, you know, and I give Anita credit on the planning board for saying on this last project, let's step back and look at, yes, it may bring some tax revenue, but let's look at the negative aspects of this development. So I think that's an important consideration.
Yes, and going back and looking over the bylaws that govern the zoning regulatory process in town, the planning board is supposed to consider economic impact. That's one of the criteria that you use in order to decide on whether a project should go forward or not. So, well, John, I think that's very well said. We're getting close to, we're down to about 1 minute and 30 seconds. So if there's anything you would like to say to the voters, and then the last 30 seconds or so, I want you to look into the camera and ask for the vote. But if there's any other thing before that you want to get off your chest, now's the time to do it.
Yeah, just, you know, you asked about leadership style. I'll mention I would characterize myself, if elected, as being a servant-type leader, meaning I'm not running to enhance my power or influence in the town. I'm running to serve the public and the residents, be a voice for them, and that's my main reason for running. I would also say that, you know, many of us that have been residents for a long time, we chose Chelmsford for a reason, and as I talk to folks in the community, the message that I'm hearing is they chose Chelmsford for a reason. They don't want it to become an urbanized area to live, so.
Or a heavy industrial area. So, well, I think that's very well said. And so now you have about 25 seconds. I want you to look into the camera and ask for the vote.
Chelmsford voters, if you're looking for a new voice and someone that will work to protect your neighborhoods, I respectfully ask for one of your 2 votes on Tuesday, April 4th. If you cannot get to the polls, just a reminder, you can vote by mail.
That's a very, very good point. Okay, very good, John. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And